get started. It is 11, and is our tape running?
Yep.
Very good, thank you. If we could go around the table and identify ourselves.
Adam Trombley, Assembly. Patrick Flynn, Assembly.
Dick Train Assembly.
Ernie Hall, Assembly.
W.S. Anderson.
Jennifer Johnston, Assembly.
Chris Birch Assembly.
Dennis Wheeler, Municipal Attorney.
William Earnhardt, Legal.
Very good. I have a question. I thought Julia, Mr. Starr requested Julia be here.
She's on her way. She's looking for documents.
Okay. All right. With that, do you want, what I did was request that the administration start off the beginning of this with process, procedure, what we do and don't do, what happens if this, what happens if that, and then the latter part specifically on the details of the contract.
Right, thank you, Madam Chair. I am expecting Nancy from ER to be here.
Good.
So hopefully she'll cover the details of the contract, because those are things I'm not particularly familiar with.
Okay.
But in terms of process, what we have said in the past, and are saying in this situation, is that the Assembly gets one bite at the apple. There was some conversations this week about whether or not the Assembly would approve or reject the arbitrator's decision, and then separately later vote on the entire contract package. And as we've described to some of you and here recently, it's not how it works. It really is a single vote. The arbitrator's decision incorporates all the provisions that were not arbitrated but that the parties had tentatively agreed to. So it takes 8 votes to accept the decision, and in doing so, you would also accept the entire contract as it stands at that point. I think I better wait and get some.
We've been joined by Mr. Jackson, Ms. Drummond, and Ms. Tucker. And I was explaining to everybody the process. But generally, they're going to go over the process and then the contract in the latter part. Okay, Mr. Train.
Dennis, that's exactly how I understand the process. We have a choice to vote yes or no on the contract, and that's it. We cannot go into details. Arbitrator's decision is what we're voting on. Is that correct?
Partially. You are voting thumbs up or thumbs down.
Right.
The Assembly is free to discuss the entire contract. That's why it's packaged and given to you prior to the meeting. You can agree or disagree with any aspect of it, but at the end of the day, when you vote yes or no,
It's on the arbitrator's decision.
It's on the entire package.
Right.
Okay.
And I think you agree with me, Debbie, and him that that's what we understand the process to be. Is that correct?
At this point, yeah.
And the purpose of my communication last night was to look backwards to see if there was, if that had been the case since the code change in '88 when this process was put in place. And the 1991 and 95 examples appear to track with what we've been saying all along, that this is in fact the process.
So Dennis, if the body turns it down, administration then is free to institute last best offer?
Yes.
And then the union's free to go on a strike if they want to?
Yes, sir.
And then it's a public safety issue, the administration can go to court and compel them to return back to work. And then, as I understand it, the arbitrator's decision becomes the contract.
That's what we're anticipating in terms of the court ruling, but that last little piece about what the court's going to do is up to the court.
Yeah,
But
always is.
what we're doing is we're working with the union's counsel to outline the steps, because what we don't want is a situation where the services aren't being provided and the needs of the community aren't being met. So we're outlining exactly who's going to do what and when. So if there is a strike vote and they vote to strike, then we'll be prepared to go into court and seek the injunction. And we anticipate there'll be a little bit of a delay between the strike vote and the strike itself, so that we'll be ready to walk in. The moment they walk out, we'll be in front of the court seeking the injunction so we can get that in place. And we're anticipating that if there were a strike, that the actual walkout would be in terms of hours, not days, not weeks. Because we'll expect to get a temporary restraining order or preliminary injunction out of the court very quickly.
Just one other question.
Go ahead, Mr. Train.
If you get a TRO, are we going to have any break in service? I'm just concerned about the services that are offered. I want to make sure that management will be there to take care of it, and TRO is issued by the court system if they issue it.
We're going to do everything we can to make that as minimal as possible. Does that mean a phone call might not get answered? Possible. But in terms of major disruption in sewer and water service, we anticipate no.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Could you elaborate a little more? So if the Assembly votes yes, da-da-da, if the Assembly votes no, da-da-da, in terms of steps?
Okay, if the assembly votes yes, the entire contract, both the TA portion and the portion that we're arbitrated, will go into effect.
Okay?
Pretty straightforward. If the assembly votes no, then what happens is the municipality's last best offer will go into effect. And then it's just a question of whether the union chooses to strike. If they do, then we'll be going to court. If they choose not to strike, then the last best offer is what's in place.
Process questions, anybody? Mr. Stark?
As opposed, I'm sorry I was late, but as opposed to merits of the situation or what?
Well, if you have any questions or concerns about the process, now's a good time.
I do. Am I next in the queue or?
You're on it.
Any more rethink about whether the applicability of 2035S makes a difference here, the two-step question? 135S, 2008 135S was the attempt, I think, by this body back then to clarify the ratification process in some aspects as it related to not only side agreement letters and the overall foundation of that, but what I'm back to is that the work intention, in my opinion, at 135S was to try to clarify the collective bargaining process and make sure that everything was ratified through the Assembly. Not to redredge the question in front of us, but is there any more consideration that we may see this as a two-step process?
We've looked at the ordinance, and no, it does not change this process.
So you're saying that there's conflicting language between 2008 135S and what's in your platform?
No, I don't consider it conflicting. I'm just saying it doesn't apply to this situation.
Even though it's Assembly intent?
Well, the assembly intent was not, if there was some intent, it was not articulated in the ordinance to change this particular process in 110.
I won't regurgitate what we did yesterday, but I'm still not of that mind. So thank you.
Okay, any other questions on process? There appear to be none. So with that, if we could have kind of a summary, I very much appreciated this chart you sent out. Thank you, Nancy. Of what's in the 75 pages and what you particularly like or didn't like.
Right. This is an
I'm sorry, before you get, I got a notepad. Can you remind everybody, this takes 8 votes, not 6. Go ahead, sir. Or ma'am, I'm sorry.
let me pass around. This is an executive summary of, of the, hang on just a second. Herb, do you happen to have that resolution, the guidance resolution with you? I think I brought copies of almost everything in the world except that. Thank you. This is an executive, what I just handed out was an executive summary of the various provisions that are in the contract. We came to agreement with the plumbers on all but essentially five issues that went to arbitration. The arbitrator decided to combine 3 of those, across-the-board wages, market increases, and service recognition into a single item for the purposes of his decision. But the 5 topics that went to the arbitrator were the only things that we didn't reach agreement on. I will say that we were negotiating throughout this process on an agreement that the other really big sort of issue that was always before us is health benefits. And we had been talking collaboratively throughout the process about migrating to a plumber's health plan where these employees would move to the plumber's trust, and not until the very end because of some of the mechanical difficulties of trying to make that migration. We decided that they would stay on the municipal health plan under the same terms and conditions as non-representative sex. I think that there is an intention, and I would maybe Greg's back there, but we want to continue those conversations to see if there might be some future arrangement that we can do with that. But when we look at benefits, it's a huge part of the package. They essentially are on the same program now as non-resident execs. So certainly in terms of what the administration's position was, we were focusing primarily on the guidance that was given to us in the resolution that was passed in March of 2010. And our last best offer reflected, I think, fairly accurately that guidance. The arbitrator's decision, as you know, found for the union's position on wages, on the continuation of service recognition, and on the addition of some market-based adjustments, which essentially puts $3 on the first step, and then each wage scale is 5% over that as people move through the steps in their tenure in government. It results in between a 12% and 15%, with some decimals in there, increase of the overall contract, and that's because of this market-based adjustment, and the variance is depending on the CPI that will go into effect in July of 2012, is a average five-year rolling between a minimum of 2.5 and a high of 3.9. So when internal audit priced it out, they were doing it based on the range, the potential range. Those are the primary financial considerations on this. There were also a number, of course, we were very interested in work rules and in some of the management issues associated with managing the workforce. These are detailed in the executive summary. I think it represents very good faith effort on both the part of the plumbers and all these areas where we agreed. I think it was a good faith effort on the part of the plumbers and the municipality to come to accommodation, fair for the employees, and still allowing greater flexibility for management to manage its workforce. There were some trade-offs associated with it, but I think for the most part it was a very reasonable and constructive process. And the fact that we were apart on the economics is probably to be expected.
Is binding arbitration, that is a management right, does that remain in the agreement, or is that out?
The plumber, well, maybe that's a question for Dennis, but the plumbers are a Class 2 union, which means that they are not, they're not bound by binding arbitration. Only in the event that there was a finding by the court that the health and safety of the public is at risk, then it sort of bumps up into the higher range and the arbitration will become binding at that point.
Okay, so arbitration is still, is that something that you have incorporated in the new agreement as well?
The arbitrator's decision is in the new agreement. And of course, this is a group that has the right to strike.
Okay. Secondly, on the August 16th memo you had from the Director of Internal Audit, the administration's last best offer indicates a total aggregate increase over the term of just under $1 million,
Correct.
$988,000. The arbitrator's decision appears to be between $3.1 and $3.4 million. So is it about 3.5 times the net? And if I understand it, the administration's last best offer, it comports to the recommendation that the Assembly had, the guidelines that the Assembly provided.
Right.
So the arbitrator's decision has increased the Assembly guidance, the cost of the guidance that the Assembly provided by about 3.5 times or so.
Correct.
Thank you.
Can I clarify? Maybe I heard your question incorrectly. I thought the process that's being employed for the 8 votes in the arbitrator decision, I thought that's what you were talking about, which isn't in the contract, it's in code. Did I hear you wrong, Chris?
No, I was looking at the...
No, your first question.
Oh, the first question? Yeah, the first question related to binding arbitration as a contract provision with this bargaining unit.
Dennis, could you or will?
Inside the contract is binding arbitration for grievances, which is disputes underneath the contract. What we're dealing with as far as approval of the contract is in the code. It's under 370 is what we do in negotiations and what happens when we reach impasse. So they're two very separate issues, and that's called interest arbitration. And with plumbers, it's not binding. They have the right to strike, although we have this almost binding aspect of it.
Okay, great, thank you.
Okay. Anybody else with questions? Gosh, you guys, I thought there'd be a ton. I'm sorry.
We've only had 700 emails in the last week on this. I think we're pretty clear on what the issues
Well,
are.
we also got a 75-page document in the email.
Oh, you missed it.
Okay.
The process is what I was concerned about, and I think you've laid it out. It takes 8 votes to approve this, otherwise the court system will get into it.
All right.
That's one where it goes.
You know, my crystal ball is always screwy on what I think will get you guys going and what it won't. So I apologize. I thought I said this because I assumed there'd be a lot of questions. And there was a big document laid on you, so I thought you might want a work session. But apparently we didn't even need it.
I think it was worth the time to clear out any underbrush before Tuesday night. So.
Okay, all right. So seeing no other questions,
The only question that I would ask is if there's anything else that we can provide you that would help you in your deliberation and your consideration.
This document electronically.
You should,
It was promised
Barbara, I
yesterday
sent it to Barbara earlier, the executive summary, I sent it to you earlier this week, but I can shoot it out
If
again.
I got it, then I sent it out.
Yeah, I think I got it.
Yeah, I can shoot it out again, no worries.
It was lost among the 700 emails.
Yeah, I'm sure it probably was.
Mr. Wheeler?
Sorry, Madam Chair, there was a suggestion earlier this week that perhaps an amendment to the AR would make it more clear that not only is the Assembly dealing with the arbitrator's decision, but the contract as a whole.
Well, my concern
So I could
was-
write something to that effect and make it more clear in the record.
My concern was, on the agenda, there's the item that we got last time, which informed this, and now there's a new AR, which came as the result of the discussion from suggestion from Ms. Tucker. My question was how we were going to vote on those, how we can deal with it. My initial thought was we take the old one and just postpone indefinitely, but it really should be part of the record. And so I suggested that maybe it be incorporated somehow, and I passed that question on to Dennis. And so he's asked, his response back is maybe it'd be simpler to just write a new AR that incorporates the old AM. I think it was an AM, the first one. So that's what we're talking about right now.
Madam Chair, thank you. Just a real simple suggestion, okay,
Please.
is that we do an S version for the resolution and attach an AM and be done with it. So it's one document with an AM. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Actually, that's, I think, a really good suggestion. The other point that came up was, since now we all realize that the whole contract is being voted on and not just those 3 points, could we somehow attach the language you suggest, that the contract be part of the whole decision-making document?
So it's mirror the language that's in there.
Okay, the other thing that came up in the last few days, I'm trying to track everything, is there was a question about Mr. Rascom's costing. And the costing is inclusive of the whole contract, but he did not include the small one-time things, which is sort of typical of how he's done the last costing, but just to clarify that. He couldn't be here today, but I wanted to clarify that point. I think that's all that's come up. Chris?
I guess one of the concerns I have is the precedent effect or impact of we as a body decide here's some guidelines. We got a whole lot of municipal contracts. We have a whole lot that you're tasked with negotiating. A number of them coming up over the years have a significant impact on the taxpayers and our cost of doing business. I guess one of the concerns I have is we have a assembly-adopted guideline that you have subscribed to and used in the process of negotiating this agreement, and it's basically been tossed by the arbitrator, who has got a, it's going to have a significant additional financial impact on the city. It's outside the scope of what this assembly adopted as a guidelines. And I guess, how do you deal with, I'm just curious what sort of impact that's going to have on negotiations on subsequent, every other contract, because everybody else is going to have, don't they have, some of them have Me Too provisions that say, well, gee, I like what they've got here, so this is going to impact everybody else, and I'm just kind of curious.
No, I don't think there's any of our contracts that need to provisions.
They don't, oh, good.
But, I mean, clearly you point out the obvious, which was that the arbitrator didn't seem to...
Not particularly interested in assembly guidelines.
That it was, the issue came up, and again, looking for confirmation, I don't want to overstate this, the subject came up a number of times during the course of the fact-finding and arbitration associated with whether or not that guidance was binding. And it is not, of course, it is guidance. And I think that the arbitrator took the word guidance to heart and disregarded it.
Anything else, Mr. Birch?
No, I would like to thank the administration for their efforts and initiative in trying to comport the agreement to the guidance that the Assembly provided in our attempt to constrain some of the cost of doing business in the city. Thank you.
Mr. Hahn?
I don't know if this is a
I'm sorry, I want to apologize. I told Jennifer I'd recognize her, and then I looked at your hand going, and I moved up. Miss Johnston, I apologize.
Ever since the ponytail went away, you recognize her.
I gotta watch out, she'll kick me.
When was the last time that we approved a contract that had service recognition in it? Because it was my understanding that our policy resolution that the Assembly passed before I co-sponsored this last one had that we were going to start getting rid of service recognition.
The getting rid of service recognition went back as far as 2000. The resolution was issued in 2007 and again in 2010. The contracts, the 2008 contracts, you will recall, and I don't want to make this an absolute statement, but most of those contracts in any event contained either the performance incentive program or the performance step program.
But no service recognition.
But it was at the employee's option. The employee could opt to stay in service recognition, or the employee could opt to move to the performance incentive. So I think that without having been there at the time, the argument was that these performance incentive programs were not, the instruction was precisely get rid of service recognition. They migrated to a different program.
Right, but the actual, the service recognition was grandfathered in for employees that...
Right, subsequent to the 2008 contracts, and I didn't answer your question. So the 2008 contracts provided this migration to performance incentive. The IBEW mechanics contract, which we presented to you, and I think it was 2010, 2009 or 10, eliminated service recognition. Again, it was essentially we had a mechanism for grandfathering people in. And then over-ending the program. And then you recently adopted the personnel rules, which eliminated the program. So the two sets of contracts that we brought you both eliminated without a substitution program.
And this is definitely going back to...
This maintains the status quo in service recognition, correct?
Thank you.
Mr. Hahn?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just so I kind of get my head around it, I think I understand, but I want to make sure from both the experts in the room. The guidance of the resolution that the Assembly, of course, I don't believe I was on the Assembly when that was actually passed. But the guidance that was given to the administration from the resolution basically applied up to and until the point that the arbitrator receives, so basically ongoing negotiations, fact-finding, mediation, up until the point it has gone to arbitration, and then it's basically whatever the arbitrator rules on. Is that a safe assumption?
Well, the guidance, and
I mean, the
I'm
arbitrator-
sure there are people who could explain this a lot more knowledgeably than I, but the 3.70, the ordinance that defines collective bargaining, requires the Assembly to provide guidance to the administration on those policy guidelines that they think are going to be important in terms of developing these employee contracts. They have to do that prior to the onset of negotiations, because once negotiations begin, you've got to do an arm's length arrangement. So we knew that we were going to be going into negotiations in 2010. In anticipation of that, the Assembly passed these guidelines. They are guidelines. I mean, they give us directions. I certainly could not in good conscience bring a contract to the Assembly that didn't conform to what those restrictions are, because my expectation would be that you would reject the contract if we didn't conform with your guidance. But that is the relationship between the municipality and the Assembly. The arbitrator clearly isn't bound by those guidelines.
So I guess I ask it again, I don't know if it's a legal way of saying it or not, but the resolution to the administration is in effect, and up until the point the arbitrator gets, if it goes to that point, the arbitrator then is not, like you say, it's more just another document that they can review and take into fact if they choose to make that work.
The resolution of the Assembly is not binding.
When we go to the arbitrator, we're trading the transaction costs, in this case, a strike. In grievance arbitration, it's the legal costs and hassles, but you're trading that for giving up your right to bargain, to determine. You're handing it over to the arbitrator and saying, we're going to live with what you do. It's just like if you choose to go to court, there you are, you're stuck with what the judge does. It makes it efficient, and the idea is to avoid the strike. Police and fire don't get the strike. We're stuck with what the arbitrator does. Don't even get to say we don't like it. It just doesn't even go to the Assembly or anyone else. That's the contract. With the Tier 2, the Assembly gets to say, do we have 8 votes to approve this or not? And give them the option to strike if they decide.
Mr. Trainee.
Nancy covered it perfectly. They take guidance from us. And it's only guidance. Sometimes some administrations have rejected our guidance. Some haven't.
Okay.
But the arbitrator's not bound by our guidance. They make their own decision.
AWW, you folks are here if there's any question about impact.
Actually, I would...
Go ahead, Ms. Johnson.
I would be interested in...
Defer to John McLean, acting general manager.
What was your question, ma'am?
Just if you see any impact through this process.
Process, no. If a strike is called and injunctive relief is not granted, we will definitely, and the entire city would be in very much trouble. We only have one certified person who would not be considered a 367 member at all of the treatment plants. And that one person would have to work nonstop if a strike were to occur. And that's a very tough situation to be in. The 367 members that we have worked very closely with them over the years. They've been very supportive. They're hard workers. They went through a process. Negotiations were done, and we're ready to move on and continue business as we always have.
Anything else? Mr. Birch.
Contingency planning for a strike, is that something that you have? I have a document here. The management team has worked quite a few hours in the last month getting ready in case there were a strike. So yes, I have probably about a 100-page contingency document
that delineates jobs for all the remaining non-reps and execs. The AMEA employees would still be doing their job, and they can only do what's in their job description and not perform a 367 task. They continue doing their job. So we've set up contracts. We've provided for security. We've set up safe passage routes. We've done quite a few hours of planning in case a strike does occur.
Ms. Drummond?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I know you've prepared carefully for that, but in the out years, let's say that the contract that the arbitrator came up with is imposed by the judge after a walkout, would AWWU have to increase its rates to cover the cost of the contract?
The operating budget for 2012 and future has not been submitted to the administration yet. We did meet with our board, and this increase in rates would increase, or the increase in wages would increase rates, and we would have to add 1.5% in 2012 to cover the increase in wages. So instead of, and again, this is all preliminary from our board that has not been approved yet by the administration, we will be going forward in 2012 with a 6% water increase and an 11% wastewater increase.
Mr. Draney and then Mr. Conley.
How many of these workers handle the introduction of fluoride in the water system?
Oh my gosh, the treatment plant here. A rough guess, people that work at the treatment plants, all of them, about 50.
And they handle the chloride?
And we're talking about all the different shifts.
Right, and they handle the chlorine that's put in the water too?
That's correct.
And how many people are you going to have for management to replace them?
One at each plant.
Total of 10.
So how much water do we have that is treated according to the requirements? I'm trying to figure out how long the water supply would last before you guys have to go to the court for a TRO.
Well, we have to be, we can operate 48 hours. Kurt could probably, he's our operations and maintenance director, and he works with a lot of the people that do that. He might be able to embellish that.
We would continue to operate the plants as they operate now, assuming nothing breaks. If something breaks, we would use contractors to fix whatever the problem is. But it depends how big the problem is. And, you know, if everything goes well, we could operate easily 48 hours, continue to treat water, continue to treat sewage. We would change our operations. We would haul sludge, for example. We would accumulate sludge in the plants. So we would change operations slightly, but we would continue to operate the plants.
Thank you, ma'am.
Mr. Wheeler, you told me yesterday that you guys are working jointly with the bargaining group to move very quickly for an injunction. So the situation that Mr. Draney described, you're pretty certain won't happen, is my understanding. Is that correct?
We're going to do everything we can so that the day we go into court is the day we get the order, getting people back to work.
We're actually drafting the paperwork, and we've had the cooperation of the unions. If everything goes according to plan, it works smoothly.
Okay.
The union is beyond our control, and the judge is beyond our control. And
Understood. I just
The
wanted
temperature is
to...
beyond your control. What do you see?
I just heard something more that related to... All right, thank you. Mr. Trombley's next.
At the last work session we had on this, I asked a question about water rates, and I can't remember exactly who, but someone from the city, I think might have been Nancy. Lucinda did. And it was a 1.5% increase for water and a 1.5% increase for sewer, so that's over a 3% increase.
No, we were originally projected to go 4.5 and 9.5. With this adjustment in the contract, we have to raise each of those 1.5 to give us 6 and 11.
Right. So it's the same. Okay.
All right? You, Mr. Owens.
Yeah, so it sounds like if there was a strike vote, you expect that the strike would never actually happen because the exchange of paperwork.
The strike would happen, but it'd be a very short time frame, looking at hours versus days.
Is there any possibility that any other union represented employees might refuse to cross the picket line if the picket line existed for however many hours? Or have you made any arrangements for that?
I believe it's actually covered by 370, I think. They are actually allowed to cross it, required to cross it, but we have not made...
I'm sorry, I can't...
We haven't made an allowance for that yet, but honestly, I don't believe it's going to be an issue.
Yeah, I have a question. Have we got any kind of a cost estimate for the legal fees and incidentals in this action at the assembly? The strike costs? Do you have any kind of ballpark?
Strike costs?
Well, basically, if we vote no, there will be a certain additional cost in terms of legal and whatever. I don't know whatever.
That's the question.
That's a question. That's an unclear question.
Sure.
I think you
When
got-
union counsel incur fees and costs of preparing pleadings and going to court, certainly what those would be, I don't know.
You don't have a ballpark on it? Okay.
No, I mean, I don't know what he's charging as an hourly rate, but we're co-drafting some of the pleadings and working cooperatively, so I don't think it'd be even assuming it would be responsible for, which is another issue we have to discuss.
In answer to Mr. Owens' question, 37120A.
Hold on a second. Mr. Drummond, he's answering your question.
37120A states that employees will not engage in striking against either A1 or A2.
The other employees, okay.
All right, thank you. Okay, anybody else on anything else? I would like to remind you that we are scheduled to attend a Covenant House barbecue informational gathering, and they would love to see all of you. It starts at noon right across the street, so I'm encouraging everybody to go. All right, if there is nothing else, sorry TV. We're adjourned.